We'll just wait.
Just
Yeah,
wait
we'll
for
do the
viewers.
whole Zoom thing,
Yeah, well,
Teams thing. We're just waiting for a few more people to join,
that's right.
and then we'll kick off, guys.
It's prime time,
Yeah,
5:56 p.m. on a Tuesday night. They love it.
Got a full agenda.
Yeah,
Got a full agenda, Greg. Need to kick this pig.
Look, there's someone in. Who's in? Let us know who's in. Put a comment in the comment section below of whatever thing you're on. Whatever doovahickey you're on.
Yeah,
Because I just stream it. There's two of us. There's two of them. Goodness me.
Oh,
Everyone's
God.
coming in. Holy dooly.
Wait, is it you and I?
The pressure's on.
No, it couldn't be.
Well, it can't be. No, I don't know. I don't go on Facebook, Jake. Or YouTube.
Good point.
I don't even know what any of those things are.
Yeah.
Whatever the youths are
Ring
into.
ring.
Yes.
Sink along.
I know. I tried to log in on my watch. It wouldn't work, so I couldn't be bothered anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'm on board with your apathy.
Oh, well, that's good. Come on board the apathy train. Sandra Barton said, good timing. Yes, I'm going to add that to the broadcast. Sandra Barton.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely good
Great
timing.
timing.
That's right. See, like we said, this is prime time, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's just sitting around doing nothing, saying, gosh, I wish the boys
Prime
from the Pouch
time
of the
and
podcast
good
would come.
timing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're having a good time and good timing. All right, I'm going to hit the theme song. Ready? Feels good to hear that. Feels good. Hello, and welcome to The Pouch, the podcast equivalent of accidentally buying cheap flights to Hobart in the winter that takes a not-so-serious look at the week in Australian news and politics. I'm Greg. Well, that'll teach me for checking my emails at 1 a.m, Savage.
And I'm wow, I do that all the time. And I'm Jake. There's nothing better than that full week after 2 full public holiday-induced 4-day weeks in a row, Far Wharton. On today's episode, we talk watches, polls, recommendations, and so very much more.
I love the way that the week in politics can be summed up with watches and polls.
Yeah.
In the spirit of reconciliation and recognition, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're podcasting today, and we recognise their continuing connection to land, water, and community. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging.
Indeed we do. And this week our thoughts go out to those affected by the cyclone Saroja.
Yes.
It's on its way to, or if not, about to make landfall, or if not, possibly already has made landfall.
It's been downgraded, Jake.
Well, it's...
I don't know where you're getting your news from.
Well, I'm getting them from yesterday. It was a big cyclone.
Category 3.
Now it's just a depression. Just like...
It's like our listeners.
Couldn't be bothered. Just
Hundreds
depressed.
of homes, Jake, have been destroyed.
Yeah,
in
it's
fact.
so unfortunate. Very, very strong winds, gusts of up to 170 kilometres per hour, if this news report is to be believed, and it is.
Yes.
But also need to mention that another COVID death. A gentleman has returned from the Philippines and has returned and went pretty well straight to a Brisbane hospital. And unfortunately, he passed away from COVID-19 complications. He was in his 80s. He died late on Monday, and it is the state's second coronavirus-related death in a week, according to the Chief Health Officer for Queensland, Janet Young.
Yes, and I think it makes it 110 deaths.
210.
910 deaths.
910,
910 deaths in Australia.
That jumped very quickly.
It did, because I looked at the correct maths. Yes, 910 deaths in Australia, so that is an unfortunate number. Every death is a tragedy, especially considering the bungles, Jake, that we're experiencing. At the
moment.
What
are the bungles? Let's detail them.
Well, I don't know where to even begin with it. Everyone's to blame. No one's to blame. States are to blame. Federal's to blame.
Prime Minister doesn't hold a vaccine.
No, he doesn't hold a needle, does he?
No.
So, what are we going to do? Get
Prime
to
Minister
it.
doesn't hold a minus 70 fridge.
No. Well, the Pfizer vaccine has to be like heaps colder, doesn't it?
It's minus 70 or minus 80. I can't recall which.
Than the
but
AstraZeneca
it's definitely
one?
One of those. Yeah, well, AstraZeneca is not as complicated.
People love it room temperature.
Well, I mean, injecting something that's at minus 70 would be quite detrimental to, well, just about every cellular process in your body. But yeah, so it has to. I mean, even the Pfizer one has to be at room temperature or close to by the time it's injected. It just has to be stored for transport at that,
right,
in order to stabilize it.
Speaking of the vaccines, Jake, and how cold they have to be, I texted you a few weeks ago and I said, look, what happens to the fridges? What happens to all these freezers once the vaccine
I said I would come back.
is all done? Yeah, but I've got an answer.
Oh, okay, so do I.
Okay, go. What's your answer?
No,
I want to marry them up.
Yeah, okay, so my answer is that... So I've got this friend. For the purposes of the podcast, we'll just say that his name is Tobias Crete,
right.
And he is a pharmacist, and he is the one that ends up with these eskies after they're utilised by the hospital. And it turns out what he does,
just in his backyard.
So this is essentially what happens is once they're done defrosting the vaccines and administering them into people's arms or butts, depending on where they prefer, he builds houses out of them. Like it's just in his backyard. He calls them the vaccine forts. He says this is the safest place to be in a COVID-19 situation. They're not wind rated.
Well, it is, isn't it? I mean, if there's another lockdown.
Yeah,
he's got some spare houses for people.
Yeah, exactly. Think of all the space for beers.
Well, and plus all these floods and cyclones and things that we're having at the moment.
Yeah, they all float. It's a boat. What's the real story, Greg?
I mean, I'm happy to compare notes on this.
I'm pretty sure I was just fabricating a tale.
Yes, I'm glad that you were. Thank you for that information, though, Tobias. No, what happens with the freezers is Tobias uses them for massive parties. Where you don't have to wheel your own esky in, which is fantastic. No. Yeah, it's great because they're all battery powered too, so they're really good.
They are, yeah.
No, what happens is that most of them were already there. They had just used for different experiments. So they haven't really had to make newer freezers or eskies, as you call them, for the transportation. And if they have, then they'll just be used in other experiments and all that sort of stuff. They just they either go back to what they were being used for, or they'll be used for other experiments and things like that. Not that they'll not be needed for the vaccine anytime soon, but interesting
absolutely.
to think about what is going to happen to them when they're done.
Yeah.
So anyway,
beer fridges.
Yeah, why not? Okay. Now, Jake, a little bit of a warm-up. This has been all over the news today. I'm pretty sure this will be outdated by the time we're reading about this, because it's on my phone. It's just been going nuts all day, backward and forward, who's to blame and all this sort of stuff. We just did play a little bit of the blame game, and obviously no one's to blame for anything. However, Christine Holgate seems to be to blame for a few things. Hit us.
Yeah,
what's happening?
It's quite an interesting story. Acknowledging that all stories are interesting, at least according to me. That's pretty well how I introduce every story. Well, it's an interesting story, Greg. It's a very interesting story.
That's why it's in the podcast.
I would say so, yes. And in this case, Greg, it's an interesting story. So, yes, the former Australia Post boss, the former CEO of Australia Post, claims that she was bullied out of her job after being, quote, humiliated by our Prime Minister. So essentially, Christine Holgate has said that she was, in fact, in quite dire straits in terms of her personal mental health, remarking that she felt suicidal after being forced out as Australia Post's boss after the excoriation by one Scott Morrison. Essentially, she was saying that the explosive attack that was directed towards her by the Prime Minister in Parliament, of all places, and then subsequently followed up with multiple press conferences, humiliated her and did not follow the course of routine justice that one would expect, both as a very high performing head of an organisation and as the head of a private entity. Interestingly enough. She says, quote, "I lost my job, a job that I loved, because I was humiliated by our Prime Minister for committing no offence and then bullied by my chairman. Of course, the offences that the non-offence that we're referring to is that last year the CEO was she gifted a few of her executives who had performed particularly well in terms of bringing return on investments into Australia Post, and she'd gifted those executives a series of Cartier watches, very expensive watches, and she did that out of the company funds. No, she did it out of her own money. She didn't it wasn't coming from the business. She did it as a way to reward her executives for their performance.
Is that true?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
she paid for that.
It's just wonky. It's just real wonky.
Huh.
And then of course there was the let's call it soft retribution by Australia Post employees who many of them around the country sent in $5 to Australia Post in order to make recompense for for the perceived ill that was done. But yes, very unfortunate. More to come.
Look, that's it. If you go onto any news site at the moment, there's a whole bunch of going backwards and forwards. She's saying she was bullied, then they're saying that she wasn't bullied. She was unlawfully stood down. That they're denying those claims. The Australia Post has named Woolworths executive Paul Graham as the new CEO. So there's already someone in there. Huge story. But yes, not a great look for Scott Morrison at the moment either, given the current situation involving marches for equal rights with women.
He's not had a great run
treatment
with
of
powerful
women.
Exactly, he's not had a great run when it comes to powerful women. I mean, even in his cabinet, say what you will. But it always is quite interesting to see how he addresses women in his cabinet.
It's just shocking at the moment, because to have another person coming out saying that they were treated poorly, another woman coming out treated poorly, saying that she was bullied, and then being silenced further. Now, Jake, my story.
Yes, what's your warm-up, Greg?
It's a good one. The push for investigation into Scientology's charity status. Now, this is particularly interesting. I've got to try and get my head around this a little bit. But Australia's charity regulator has been called on to investigate Scientology amid concerns it is abusing its not-for-profit status. An investigation by The Age and Sydney Morning Herald found the Church of Scientology had shifted tens of millions of dollars into Australia from offshore and is making significant tax-free profits. Australia, the investigation found, has become an international haven for the religion despite a sharp fall in its numbers of local adherents. Greens Treasury spokesman Nick McKim, classic Nick, called on the regulator to investigate. There is a very clear case for the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission to review Scientology's status, Mr. McKim said. They should investigate whether Australia is being used as a tax haven for an organisation. Now, reading further into this, Jake, it became apparent that, the number of Scientologists in Australia has declined significantly. However, Australia is one of the only countries to still consider Scientology as a charitable
organization.
As a charitable organization. So they do get that not-for-profit tax benefit. It says assets rose from $60.1 million in 2013 to $172.4 million in 2019.
And how many adherents did you say?
Well, I didn't, but I do believe I did look into it. They refused to answer the question about how fewer than 1,700 is the number that's being. It's crazy, right?
For 2,000 people and their assets are what did you say? 200 million.
Yeah, they've gone up. Significantly, nearly tripling since 2000. In total, $326 million of Scientology assets are now owned through Australia. So $326 million of assets, 1,700 adherents. Now, I do have to be clear, and I'm sure they're not hiding anything. They have refused to comment on the 1,700 number. But if that's true, in terms of the 2016 census data, that's where that information comes from. Then that's down by a third in a decade. So in a decade, they've lost that much. I think that what is the census this year? It must be.
Every 6 years.
Is it? I don't know. Anyway,
yeah, it's close.
That's good. Yes. Let's go with yes for now. And so 2016, 1,700. So surely it's gone down since then. But their assets are going up. So anyway, I think good on them for trying to bring attention to this. Yeah.
That is amazing that the number of adherents has decreased, and yet the amount of assets, i.e. the amount of stuff that the organization has purchased on the backs of the donations given to the organization. Wow, that's that. Yeah, wow.
Well, I've got a photo of the Scientology.
200 million divided by 2,000.
Gareth Trustamars will tell us. He's listening. He's commenting.
Yeah.
You do the math, like Gareth.
20. What is it? 20,000, 200,000 per.
Yeah, it's something. It's like what we get for our Patreon, which is patreon.com/ the Pouch of the Podcast. Anyway, we almost have more listeners, Jake, than people who are adherents to Scientology in Australia. So go us. Gareth has warned us though. He does say, "Careful, guys, bag Scientology too much, and you'll get a visit from Tom Cruise." Which we
darn it to heck.
Which we anyway. Hopefully, the value of my house will go up if that happens.
Yeah, well. If the worst thing that could happen to me in a day is to sit down and discuss the merits of teaching children Krav Maga as a martial art in preparation for working in film and television, with one Tom Cruise.
Absolutely.
That's a great day.
It's better than getting, I don't know.
Having to
get basil stuck in your teeth or something.
Church.
Plus, you know that he doesn't sit down, Jake. He always jumps up on those couches. Now,
I've got perfect jumping couches. Don't worry.
All right. Now, this story is from a little while ago, Jake, but I didn't want to let it go. Federal politics story number 1. We've been abandoned. Stranded Australians are taking their fight to come home to the United Nations, and so they should. Should they? Well, should. Yes, they should. Why wouldn't you? You got nothing to lose and a lot of time on your hands.
Well, they do have stuff to use because they have appointed. And part of this story is that they've appointed one of Australia's most prominent Queen's Counsel, Geoffrey Roberts QC.
Yes, he comes up a bit, doesn't he?
He does, particularly in these types of human rights cases, because his bag is really human rights and environment and others.
He loves it.
But yeah, absolutely fascinating gentleman, and he's got an amazing record over decades upon decades.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, the thing here is Queen's Counsels, they ain't cheap, but anyway, nothing to lose except for. Well, maybe. All
right, so I'm an Australian overseas. What am I doing? I'm one of the 36,000 Australians stuck overseas. What am I doing tomorrow?
Well, I disagree with the premise of that question there, Greg. We identified a good few thousand people, shortly after the closure of Australia's borders, and we gave them plenty of time to come back to Australia.
Sure.
And unfortunately, they chose, Greg, to disregard that.
All right, fine. I'm one of the 36,000 people who are choosing to stay overseas.
Yeah, look, Greg. I take issue with the premise of your question. No, so yes, when Prime Minister Scott Morrison advised Australians to come home last year, one Jason and his wife were left with some difficult questions, and we're reading from SBS.com here. Quote: "Do I give up my job? Do I sell everything and make a massive loss? Do I leave my pets here?" The US-based Australian asked themselves. Given that they were safe, Jason had a job. They decided to stay. Obviously, they'd rooted themselves in the community. They had pets. They had a house. They had friends. It's all of that stuff. But Jason had no idea how long he would be separated from his home country. an extra year, it seems. At least.
We didn't know. We don't know. We still don't know how long it is.
Well, so true. Yeah, it's been hard. He says since the advisory in March 2020 of the border shutdown. A family member has fallen ill with cancer. Another family member is having a baby. On top of that, their property in Australia needs maintenance. No one there to mow the lawns.
No, I'll do it.
And they have an elderly family that they need to see. But yeah, so Jason and his family, they're one of a group of Australians to have made submissions to the United Nations, arguing that their home country has breached an international convention, Greg.
Absolutely.
The complainants are saying that Australia has breached an article of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which provides that, quote, no one shall be arbitrarily deprived. I can't even say it. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of the right to enter his or her
or their,
Greg, or their. So true. Own country. The initiative was started by a group called strandedaussies.org. Couldn't even spring for the AU.
I'm going to go there. Strandedaussies.org. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, could have gone for the strandedaussies.org.au. No, they've gone the cheaper way out.
Yeah, well, of course. The .au is actually pretty expensive.
It is very expensive,
and you need an ABN.
Hey, look, if you're springing for a for a QC, why not spring a little bit further? But it includes volunteers who have been impacted by the so-called flight caps.
Well, look, I'm on there now. Look, Murray, 2 days ago, I've been in China since the pandemic began. I need to go home to look after my elderly mother in her golden years. Yeah. The thing stopping me is I want to bring my 2 young kids home too, but can't put them through 2 weeks hotel room quarantine. That and the flights have been expensive, so you can basically log in. You can log in with Facebook or Google, and you can chat with people who are also stranded. So it's got, I believe there's a lot of misinformation reaching the Aussie households. Most don't really know what's going on and prefer to keep it that way. They're too busy. Anyway, quite a few angry people on here, Jake. But yeah,
it's not at all surprising. I mean, from their perspective, they are kept apart from their nation that they love and have. They have their familial links in their country of Australia.
Yes.
But the argument on the other side is, hey, we have virtually no coronavirus here because we're keeping you out. And it's not a you thing. It's a you being in the place that you decided to be in when or after the borders shut. And it's such an interesting thing because as much as I don't necessarily like to, I don't want to. I want to be empathetic towards these individuals who have decided to remain in the country of where they were staying when Australia shut their borders. But they were given ample time to make a decision. Other pandemics have lasted just as long, if not longer. And it is one of those things that it's. There is no easy way in when you consider that by keeping the trickle as a trickle, we're keeping the broader Australian public safe from the economic and the health and the other impacts of coronavirus.
Well, here's a little breakdown for you, Jake. Weekly flight caps into Australia, effective from the 9th of April. New South Wales, 3,000 passengers per week. Queensland was 600 passengers per week until tonight, actually, until midnight tonight, and then they'll go back up to the 1,000 passengers per week. Western Australia, 1,000 passengers per week, which is surprising. Victoria, 800 passengers per week, increasing to 1,000 as soon as possible. South Australia, 530 passengers per week. Tasmania, 0, Jake. They're not accepting any arrivals. ACT.
I wouldn't either if I were them.
0, Jake.
Yeah.
And the Northern Territory, also 0. Yep. I'm surprised about Western Australia accepting 1,025. Why? I'm also surprised at the Northern Territory accepting 0.
Well, that's the thing. Northern Territory don't necessarily have the facilities to do it. It's one of these things. The states and territories have been asking the national cabinet, i.e. the Prime Minister and that cabinet that he convenes, for centralised quarantine facilities. Much the same as in the early days of coronavirus. Australia held, forced quarantine camps, if you like, on Christmas Island and at other centralized locations. They were very well staffed by medical professionals. They were quarantined offshore. There was no opportunity for the virus to break out and make its way to the mainland. So that kind of thing is something that the states and territories have been asking for some time, and would potentially enable Australia as a country to do this. And the other thing to recognise here is that quarantine is the purview of the federal government, and the federal government has devolved that to the states. So when we're talking about when we're talking about the states putting a cap on the number of people that they can bring in, that is only because the states have to be able to set that. The states have to set up entire industries around their quarantine services.
Yes,
and it is an enormous imposition, not one that they have been shy to take on. Obviously, noting ACT, Tasmania, and Northern Territory, but they are doing it. They are doing what they can to bring in that around 1,000 people per week, in order to bring people back into Australia. But it is not an easy thing to do.
I disagree. They're doing everything, Jake. Aren't we meant to be building concentration camps in the deserts where they're going to go out there and pick fruit while they're quarantining?
That not necessarily the picking fruit part, but that was one. That was a number of the proposals that were put forward by Queensland and other states and territories, that we centralise these quarantine facilities, because again, quarantine is the purview, is the responsibility of the federal government. But the federal government has very quickly put the kibosh on those on centralising those services. So
this is the other thing, right? That you've got the vaccine has been delayed here in Australia, so they're actually talking about the possibility that international flights won't even commence until 2023. Having said that, if people in Australia aren't vaccinated, the chances that one of these 36,000 people come back from overseas, they may actually carry mutant variations, right, of the COVID-19 thing, which then spreads across our communities because we're not vaccinated. So those chances increase with every day that these people are overseas as well. So bringing them home might be advantageous for us in terms of limiting the amount of people who come through our borders at that time. Brendan Payne has asked if we've taken the vaccine shot. I think we might get to that in a second. But Fred Stokes has said there's also the binational couples. I'll bring it up on the broadcast. It's a bit of a long one, but oh well. There's also the binational couples and families who are stuck apart as well. Not with these vaccination changes. We have no idea when that will be allowed. Having a planned date is massive for mental health. He had to take yesterday off after Scott Morrison announced via Facebook on Sunday night. Yeah, there were huge criticisms over the fact that he did that over Facebook as well without taking questions from people or anything like that. At least it's sort of the information got out there, I suppose. But yeah, certainly could have been another face-to-face opportunity. I agree, Fred. It was a very traumatic situation. When I heard the news, I was a bit like, oh, well, look, it's another sort of delay and all that sort of stuff. But like Scott Morrison has said, it's not a race. But really, given these people who are stranded overseas, given the variants that could come across, given the people who are now susceptible, and the questioning that will be happening in people's minds about the vaccine, it is a bit of a race. I think it is a bit of a race.
See, I don't get the premise that it's not a race, because up until this date, the federal government, while not admitting that it was a race, were putting sincere and many states would remark highly challenging targets associated with the deployment of the various vaccines into Australian arms and butts. So the premise that it's not a race denies the fact that the federal government's targets were forcing the states and territories to race sincerely.
Right. And we know now that they've gotten rid of the targets, that now, the general public's not privy to that information.
Well, there's still.
It's a bit like Apple not reporting their iPhone sales anymore, because it's just like, well, stuff you,
and not reporting their obsolescence statistics. It is. It's one of those things. But the government is still saying that by the end of the year, all Australians who want a vaccine will have had their first dose.
Are they? Are they still saying that? But they've gotten rid of the targets.
By the end of this year, everyone who wants a vaccine will be able to have their first dose. They're acknowledging that second doses may not be before the end of the year,
right?
But they are suggesting, and look, part of the reason why they've removed the targets, and I really don't want to be cynical about the age basis that they've put in for the AstraZeneca thing, because the UK set it at 30, other countries set it at 30, a lot of the EU set it at 50, we've set it at 50,
right?
Does that have something to do with the fact that projections of the number of AstraZeneca vaccines that we're able to get out to the states and territories is much lower than expected? Potentially, I don't know. I really hope not. I don't want to be cynical about that stuff. I want to be hopeful that our Prime Minister and various health secretaries and professionals are acting on the best evidence and best advice. But the timing of the notice of the slowing of the vaccine numbers from AstraZeneca, both internationally and those manufactured in CSL in Melbourne, happened to unfortunately coincide quite closely with the announcement that only people over 50 are recommended the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Yes, and Kevin Rudd has been very vocal about this. The idea that Scott Morrison is trying to gaslight us. He actually writes a pretty good article. I read it in the Guardian. When was this? Monday, April 12th. So yesterday, and he says that there were four sort of things that we could lessons that we can be taking from this idea. That we can. What was number one? Number one, reassured by straight talkers. So we need straight talkers. We could look to the United States was the second one. Given that they'll actually have a sort of an abundance of vaccine, they might be able to help us out there. Third, we should be learning from our friends and allies about their experiences running mass vaccination centres rather than just using GP clinics, all that sort of stuff. I think New South Wales might actually be doing something along the lines of that.
Yeah, they're about to launch one in Homebush.
Launching one, that's right.
Which is off.
It'll launch its way over to Western Australia so that it can take advantage of the time delay. And fourth, the government must overhaul its local production efforts. So the pharmaceutical industry is reportedly rife with stories of Australian officials not answering correspondence, not returning phone calls, blah 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 blah. But yes, anyway, a pretty good article written by Kevin Rudd, as former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, in there, which I read today. So yeah, but anyway, his ultimate argument is that Scott Morrison is trying to gaslight us in the sense that he's trying to say, look, I never said that everyone would get their what did he say? That we would be at the front of the queue for our vaccines, but apparently
he
not.
said. Prime Minister was essentially saying, look, I don't accept the premise of that question, Lee. Anyway, sorry, I'm a little bit cynical about the Prime Minister's announcements over the last week.
Yeah. Look, it's definitely not a good look. And there's just shifting of blame everywhere. It'd be nice to hear someone say, look, yeah, actually it was my fault, and I've buggered up, and we need to fix it up.
The thing is, it's not even a fault. It's not even a blame assignment type thing. I don't think, anyway. With the exception of one of the individuals like David Littleproud, who a week ago accused the states of, to quote, doing 3/5 of bugger all.
Well, Kevin Rudd has said Morrison's job is to ensure that his health bureaucracy has a clear, workable communications plan with the nation's medical workforce on vaccine distribution. At the same time, Morrison should recognise that his own hyperactive political messaging, that's a good one, put that up here, is actually eroding the public's confidence rather than boosting it. So, yeah, he does have some responsibilities to bear, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I suppose I was more referring to the rollout schedule. It's one thing to set an ambitious target.
Mm.
It's another thing to not adjust that ambitious target when you realize that your supply is not going to meet the demand.
Absolutely. Now, we're not the only ones, Jake, feeling the frustrations, feeling the pinch of this situation here. As Fred Stokes alluded to, his own mental health has taken a bit of a hit given this information.
Yeah, sorry to hear.
It's coming. Yeah. And hopefully you're doing all the right things. Having said that, Scott Morrison's approval rating has plummeted, Jake, in one of the latest news polls. Samantha Maiden has written for news.com.au. Tell us about what's happening here, Jake. No, she often does. Classic Samantha. Hey,
yep.
always working away, chipping away at her articles.
Yeah, so
coming right from the pouch.
Exactly. It's about time we got a professional writer here. And so
dot point business.
Yeah, I know. What's with this high level summaries of stuff, right? Jeez.
All right. So where was he, and where is he now, Jake? The graph's not looking good.
He used to be at around 62% on a prime ministerial preferred prime minister basis.
Right.
And now, Greg, he is 55%.
Whoa! So he's just
still
chipping
highly
it in
preferred.
there.
Still highly preferred. He's still in the majority. And I think Albanese is sitting at around 32%. So he's not exactly
the other
up there.
ones?
But look, there's a lot of contributing factors here, and I think there's a lot of probably high level Labor politicians who are looking at that modest 32% in terms of the preferred prime minister, and rubbing their hands together, or perhaps recognizing that the Labor leadership at the moment is the poison chalice that it potentially is. But anyway, Scott Morrison has been doing a few things over the last few weeks, of course. He's been, downplaying vaccine rollouts. He's been announcing announcements. He's been not attending,
mass
highly
marches.
publicized women's marches. He's been dealing very, very poorly with a culture of sexism, misogyny, and sexualization in Parliament.
Being accused of bullying, like as of today. Like we talked about with Christine Holgate.
Yeah, and has had many, many fiery press conferences. It seems that the press gallery is, less and less willing to accept the Prime Minister's accounts of things in press conferences, and there have been various interviews over the last few weeks where the interviewers have been reasonably scathing of the Prime Minister, particularly when it came to his dealing with the, for example, the Brittany Higgins situation, Sorry, that's probably quite insensitive to refer to it that way. The way that he dealt with the women's fight for justice marches, and those other situations around Liberal staffers doing naughty things in various places around Parliament House. It seems that it has in fact reflected on him quite poorly, and it has resulted in a reduction in voters' satisfaction with the Prime Minister's performance.
Yeah, it'll.
How about that?
Well, it has real world implications too. Like because when they're not confident, when the Liberals aren't confident, they do things like what they've done with Andrew Laming, who was just ordered into empathy training rather than
getting kicked out,
being fired. Right, this whole empathy training thing is driving me crazy. So he's just, he's that's right. He's forced into apologizing and to empathy training so that they can hold on to their majority a bit more comfortably. It has real world implications. It's not just a matter of going, oh, this is a bit of a shame that their numbers are down. The way that they're handling themselves and the way that they're handling these situations, which I don't know. It blows my mind sometimes because it doesn't seem that difficult.
You're absolutely right to highlight that case of Andrew Laming, because in the public's perception, failing to act is an act of itself, right? It is committing to behaviour that is unacceptable by the general public. Now,
Yeah.
does the premise of this sexualization in Parliament House, does this culture of misogyny and sexism and various other isms in Parliament House have real world implications? Does it have cut through in terms of economic impact? Does it have cut through in terms of equity of access to healthcare or equity of outcomes in healthcare? It probably doesn't. But what it certainly does have is it has. It shows Australians what the personality, what the culture, what the thoughts, feelings, and behaviours behind our Prime Minister and his cabinet actually are.
Yeah.
Well, people remember. Sorry, go on.
No.
I was going to say people remember people like Bob Hawke. The beer drinking larrikin in the pub. The guy who schooned a yard glass, the guy who, cried in Parliament when there were the tanks in Tiananmen Square and said, send us these people. Don't crush them. Don't kill them. Send them over here. We will take care of them. We want them. They are valued as humans. People loved Malcolm Fraser for his 30-year reign. But apart from that, he's, the regulation that he did, the deregulation that he did, and various other things. People love these various prime ministers and executive cabinet in the ministry because they are personalities. They do things. They have conviction. Yeah. And with this guy, with our Prime Minister Scott Morrison, I keep doing that. Guy. He's showing himself to be not such a great individual to be associated with.
No,
but again, does it have cut through to the economy? Does it have cut through to real world stuff? I'm not sure.
Well, I think it does. I think a good example of this, and we don't have it as part of the show, so I'm just going to do this as a quick off-the-cuff thing. But there was this story which came, I think, late last week, which was about this WhatsApp leak and the ministers shut out of the NDIS redraft, right? Yeah. So this was about, they had a little, all of the people involved in making decisions about the NDIS were all on this group chat for WhatsApp. Apparently, Stuart Robert, before he was moved from the NDIS portfolio in the cabinet reshuffle, had never made these draft submissions about the NDIS to anyone. He hadn't got any input from any of the other people involved in NDIS. Now, apparently, without getting too much off topic, it gave him a God mode, which basically said the God power, which basically meant that at any point the Minister for Disabilities could basically make that change to make a change to the NDIS, which they would have to follow. Now, I think that does have real-world implications, right? If this is how you're running your cabinet, at one point apparently there was 80 drafts that no one has ever seen of this new NDIS legislation, right? Now, in the middle of all of that, there's been a cabinet reshuffle. The person who's done those 80 drafts is now left that particular role. Linda Reynolds, of all people, has been put in charge of that role and has not addressed this WhatsApp group chat at all. And so
I think she did say hello.
Yeah, that's right. She
said, "I'm looking forward to working with you."
That's it, right? And it's funny because it's so ridiculous. Now, I think it does have real-world implications, right? That this directly affects an already disadvantaged section of our society. And we've already seen that with the vaccine rollout as well. There's a group who have come out and said that a whole bunch of disability people in disability aged care homes have not yet got the vaccine at all, even though they were eligible early on. So, it does have real world implications. This mess of a situation does have real world implications. Is it absolutely off the charts, dreadful all the time? No, there's good things that are happening, and Scott Morrison's done some wonderful things and got us through the pandemic, blah, 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 blah. But at the moment, he's not coping with it very well. Yeah, and I do have an opinion about why that is too, but my 43 minutes is up.
Well, I'd love to hear it. Look, I think broadly speaking, Scott Morrison and his cabinet have gotten Australia, given that the states really pushed the federal government to act. But Scott Morrison has gotten Australia through the pandemic economically in a way that virtually no other country can boast. So obviously we've been put into debt and we'll be in debt for a long time. But obviously, again, interest rates are extraordinarily low. So what I'm putting out here is, yes, it's been managed poorly. Yes, the Prime Minister is not one of ideological conviction, which is great in some instances and a bit weird and unfortunate in others. But I suppose when it comes to an election, noting that the voter satisfaction is down when it comes to the Prime Minister, when it comes to an election, what are voters going to be looking at? And I guarantee that Scott Morrison is going to be pointing to things like the economy.
Yeah.
Things like the success in the vaccine rollout, even though it's not been great. Invariably, he could probably explain that as a supply and demand type thing. I'm thinking strategically here. The Prime Minister is going to be talking up his achievements, and he is going to be, touting the fact that while he may not be one of cultural change, while he and he specifically said that I don't have the ego necessary to make broad sweeping changes to policy or platform, but what I do have is a general intention to make things better for people, but which is essentially saying the same thing in two different ways. But I do wonder whether come an election, polls closer to an election, whether people will be caring about what we may perceive as commentators as really important cultural issues within Parliament House, within politics in general. Will they be connecting those dots to Scott Morrison and continue to put him down as a not great leader?
I think so. I think that one of the fundamental differences between the upcoming election and the last election was that you could still have people on the right. You could easily see an argument for people on the right to make some sense out of what was going on in the country, right? And they were the silent majority. This time around, people on the right are going to be directly impacted from this whole rollout. They're going to be financially impacted. The businesses are going to be impacted. Media is going to be impacted. Tourism is going to be impacted. Everything's impacted by this vaccine rollout not going well. And workplaces are going to be significantly impacted by these behaviours being accepted in the workplaces. I'm talking about the women's rights concerns and that sort of thing at the moment. A couple of comments online. Fred Stokes has said, I called out the announcement last year as BS last year and got it justified as him giving hope. This is how he has managed everything. Make an announcement, then move on, thinking his job is done. Avoid all questions and accountability, awaiting the media cycle to move on. The only difference this year is the media hasn't moved on. I couldn't agree with you more, Fred. I think there's 2 or 3 stories that they've really dug their heels into.
Look, I don't agree with the premise of that suggestion there, Fred. I feel as though you need to get your facts straight, buddy. But I'm happy to answer the question if there is one there. I think that's how the Prime Minister would respond.
Gareth does have a question. Gareth Strustamanis. Do you think ScoMo would have responded differently if Christine Holgate was a man? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know either.
It's not an experiment we get to run, is it?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. There probably is instances of Prime Ministers overreacting, regardless of the gender of the person. Personally, I'd like to think no. I think that he probably would have acted the same, given the same set of limited facts. Because the issue was not that the Prime Minister was given a comprehensive set of facts and then given a bully pulpit to talk from. The issue was that the set of facts that the Prime Minister was given were flawed and yet he ran with it anyway. And that escalation from there, essentially when the media questioned him on the interpretation of the facts that he'd received, led to further escalation. So I honestly don't think, I don't think that he would have acted differently, but without evidence to the contrary, I probably don't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah, I think evidence to the contrary is probably around the fact that there's obviously a huge cultural issue in Parliament House in the way that women are treated, and it's so blatantly obvious that we don't get to run the experiment to see if what would happen if she was a man or whatever. It's like, well, women are treated very poorly by ministers and prime ministers and backbenchers and whatever else and staffers and all this sorts of things, because all of these stories are coming out, so much so that we've got an inquiry happening into it at the moment. So it's a wider cultural situation as well. So whether or not I don't know. What am I trying to say? I don't know what I'm trying to say. Good chat. Brandon Payne said hello.
Hey, Brendan.
Fred Stokes has said the voters in general will follow what their major media outlet reports. So it comes down to whether News Corp chooses to back him or not. Yes, and we got a little taste of that the other week, didn't we? When he accused News Corp of having what was it? He said, you've got your own situation, your own inquiry at the moment happening into a sexual misconduct allegation, which turned out not to be true. And ScoMo got a little taste of not to get on the good side, not to get on the bad side of Papa Bear.
I would say, interestingly, and I think we probably got to wrap up, otherwise ears will bleed. Not yours and mine, but probably those listening. But interestingly enough, Malcolm Turnbull was given a position on a council board for essentially getting to net zero as quickly as possible. And he was kicked off that board when it was announced that the member for Hunter in New South Wales Parliament was kicked out of Parliament last week. And part of this is that he was he was kicked out of this thing, he says, because News Corp were giving him a bad rap, and they were doing some backgrounding on him and forcing people to change their attitude towards having him on the board or as the chair. The reality, of course, is that politics got in the way. That while he was supported prior to the member for Hunter, who was kicked out of Parliament because of a number of allegations of a sexual nature that are quite horrendous, that led to a by-election in the Hunter region. The Hunter region currently has a coal-fired power plant, currently has coal being dug out. It's one of those areas where it's very coal-heavy, and the otherwise reasonably environmentally minded Parliament of New South Wales that has a small L and capital L Liberal Environment Minister. They booted Scott Morrison out of this position, despite the fact that his goal was to actively reduce emissions as part of this portfolio. Very, very interesting thing. But Barnaby Joyce reflected on Malcolm Turnbull's comments, calling Malcolm Turnbull a Suki Lala. God, I love the brevity of those Nationals politicians.
Yep.
Quit being a Suki Lala.
All right. Now, having said all of that, Jake, Scott Morrison has actually accepted some of or all of 55 of Kate Jenkins' recommendations on sexual harassment. Now, this is the report Respect at Work. Can you talk us a little bit about what is happening here that Scott Morrison is doing?
Yeah, so the report, the Respect at Work report, which was formed over some time from 60 submissions, including 60 massive consultations across Australian workplaces. It was tabled about a year ago in the Attorney General's department. They were the ones that originally commissioned the report, and because the Minister for Industrial Relations was also the Minister for Industrial Relations at the time, Christian Porter.
Oh, yeah.
But nonetheless, that report sat on the desk of that minister for over a year. And when it became politically expedient, no, wait, that's far too cynical, Jake. That was very naughty. It was. It's not right to point out that it was politically expedient to now start discussing women's rights and the importance of creating safe workplaces for women.
Yeah, well, according to this, as part of the March for Justice, a petition of 90,000 signatures was delivered to Canberra politicians. A key demand was that the government fully implement those 55 recommendations in the Respect at Work report.
Yes, they haven't said that they would implement them. They said that they would accept them. Some of them have been accepted. Some of them have been accepted in principle. I think only one of them was actually rejected, and I don't have the details on that specific one. But nonetheless, it's it's really quite interesting. Some of them are really weird and a little bit contradictory, saying that people like ministers are to be dealt with in the same way that any other CEO or major employee would be treated. But that's of course weird because they're not appointed, they're not employed, they are elected. So it's very difficult to fire someone who has not been employed. But anyway, so there was some really interesting things around there. There's some there's some speculation about obviously what is going to be put into a budget in this particular portfolio. So look, more information to come, but nonetheless, this landmark report from Kate Jenkins, the Sexual Discrimination Commissioner, has it is very important, and it looks like it will Sex Discrimination Commissioner, pardon me. It looks like it is headed for action in Australian Parliament.
Yeah, I'm going through the report now, and there's a lot of sort of noted, agreed in part, agreed in principle.
Yes.
So the language there is still a bit fluffy. I was trying to find the one that may have not been agreed upon. But I think they've, at least it looks like that with all of them, have agreed in principle.
Agreed in part.
There's a couple of noteds in there. Noted. The recommendation number 41, 44, 45, 47, they're all noted.
I did find the remarks of the Prime Minister quite interesting when the media was asking, why did it take over a year for your cabinet to start looking at this and start considering this as important? Of course, noting the cynicism that the timing in relation to the March for Justice, the timing around Brittany Higgins, the timing around Grace Tane, the timing around these accusations of sexual impropriety in Parliament House with staffers, etc., is quite coincidental, you might say, with the acceptance. But the Prime Minister said,
in the end, they're politicians, right? And
exactly.
And if there's pressure from the general public to make a change, and they're happy to make those changes, then I think we should embrace that at least a little, at least a little bit. They're going to play political games. They're politicians after all,
They are.
Our job.
It was a little bit funny though. The Prime Minister essentially said, nobody asked me about it. Like I've been in question time like every day for years, guys, and not a single person has said, what are you doing with the Respect at Work report, guys? What are you doing, to the Prime Minister? What are you doing with the Respect at Work?
Yeah, it wasn't a what do you call it? Like a big rock.
Yeah, he said
your big rocks, your little rocks. It wasn't a big rock.
Exactly.
No one told him it was a big rock.
I've had this little thing called coronavirus that I've been dealing with. For the last little while, guys. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Look, Eric can't deal with anything else.
Cynical.
It is a little bit cynical.
And walk at the same time.
No, absolutely not. But all right, Jake. I'm pretty good. Are you pretty good with all of that?
Oh, I'm so good. I was good before the last story. So
I thought you were, and I thought I'm going to sneak it in there anyway. Oh, dear. Now I'm pretty exhausted. We've hit the 58-minute mark, which is all right. But yes, look, thank you, Brandon Payne, for being involved. Thank you, Gareth Streister-Martis, for being involved. Thank you, Fred Stokes, for being involved. And I'm going to play the music, Jake. If you want to tell, what can people do, Jake? Give them something to do. when they're
love
done
it if
doing
they could
nothing
go
with their
to-
lives.
Exactly.
Useless.
Guys, do some more stuff, please. Included in that stuff that we'd love you to do is to go to patreon.com/The Pouch, the podcast, and subscribe, because we do some cool stuff for patrons. You can subscribe at any level and get access to the cool stuff that we do. But apart from that, if you're not ready for that level of commitment, we'd love it if you could go to your podcast listening application of choice and give us the thumbs up, give us a star rating. Give us a review, because that helps for other people to find us. And of course, it makes us feel warm and fuzzy on the inside.
Which is the most important part. We're warm and fuzzy on the
Not just warm and
outside.
fuzzy on the outside, yeah.
Hey, man, it has been cold, hasn't it? Holy.
It has. Yeah, well, it was 20 degrees this morning, and gosh, it was cold. It was freezing.
Freezing,
There's
yeah.
6 jumpers on. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
Had the
yeah.
fire going.
It's crazy. Look, if you do want to share the love and, sit around by the warm and cozy fire listening to the Pouch Podcast, you can tell your friends, families, or foes to head to thepouchpodcast.com, where they can choose their favorite podcast player of choice. My wife, she wore her Pouch the Podcast shirt out in public the other day. and the lady, the chemist, said, what is the Pouch the Podcast? It's my husband. He does this thing where he sort of chats with his mate once a week about politics in Australia. And okay. And she said, so it's not about, like, marsupials? And she's like, no. She goes, okay, I was going to watch it. I was going to listen to it if it was about, like, wombats and looking after kangaroos and looking after koalas after bushfires. She goes, but I'm not
That's
really...
where the market is.
I'm not really into
That's-
politics.
That's where the market is. We should be cornering the marsupial market. Let's get it. Greg, did you know that wombats do square poos, Greg?
No.
Square poos.
That's not true.
It is true. It is true. They do
that's not
square
true.
poos.
No.
Yep, it's true.
Well,
Good.
they don't have square bottoms, so I'm not
They
believing
do.
it. They
They
don't.
have.
But they make little
square-
cubes in their in their gut first.
Yeah. It's amazing.
It's where Rubik's cubes come from.
Well, my ancestors.
All right.